Hello and welcome back to the Watchlist on back-row.com. My name is Dan Gorman, the host of the Watchlist. This is a show where I shuffle my watch list on Letterboxd and let whatever the top spot movie be the next thing that I watch. So this is an attempt to get through my 2034 film long and growing watch list. There is one episode of the show up on YouTube so far, and I believe this episode will be premiering on Patreon. So check out the Back Row Patreon, and you'll be able to get stuff like this early, probably a week early at least, if not more. And plus there'll be exclusive episodes of the watch list up there as well. So today, I think I'm going to do something a little different. I'm going to go to my watch list on Letterboxd, and since we're getting into the Halloween mood, I think the next couple episodes I'm going to set the genre to horror, and let's just see what comes up, and we'll watch a couple horror movies. Maybe one of them will be a Patreon exclusive, and some of them will be available on YouTube, but I just think that the next few I want to have that horror movie vibe. So, you know, it's getting into fall. I like to start pretty early. Generally once September rolls around and chill in the air starts to roll in, I'm just like, okay, horror movies for 2 months straight. Not exclusively, but mostly anyway. And then I usually burn myself out. So, as you would expect. Okay, let's do this. Let's do horror, sort by, shuffle, and see what happens. From a Whisper to a Scream, from 1987, directed by Jeff Burr, who I believe did The Scarecrow, right? Night of the Scarecrow, Phantom Town. I've seen Phantom Town. And I've seen Leatherface, Texas Chainsaw Massacre 3. I've also seen Stepfather 2 and Pumpkinhead. So this is a director I've seen a number of films by. I have always wanted to see Spoiler. Look at that poster. That's awesome. Gary Daniels. Anyway, I'm not a fan of... Well, I'm not saying I'm not a fan of Jeff Burr. I'm just saying I'm not a fan of Texas Chainsaw Massacre 3. And I know that some people are. But I've never really vibed with that one. But I've liked some of their other movies. I think Stepfather 2 is pretty good. Pumpkinhead 2 is okay. I actually haven't really seen in a very long time their Puppet Masters 4 and 5. But I remember Phantom Town being kind of fun. So yeah, I believe this is for some reason I always think that this is an anthology. Is it? Yeah, it is. The uncle of an executed murderer relates 4 stories of his hometown, Oldfield, to a reporter. I won't go into each one, but yeah, Vincent Price, Clu Gulager, lots of people in this. This is one that, oh, sweet, Susan Tyrrell. This is one that's kind of just been not like... It's probably been on my watch list for a really long time, but it's also one of those movies that I've just seen the cover for a lot and have always kind of meant to see, but never really finally sat down and pulled the trigger on it. So I'm excited to do that here today. So I'm going to go watch From a Whisper to a Scream, 1987, Jeff Burr. And when I come back here, in a day or so, we'll talk about it.
Welcome to Oldfield. Oldfield has a long history of violence and murder.
It's as though the very foundation of this place was human suffering.
I'm too old for nightmares.
One thing I've learned, my dear, is that one is never too old for nightmares.
Here in a small American town, the horrors of the past have come alive in the present. From the grave to the swamp. From the carnival.
Oh my God, what's happening to me?
To the fields. From a whisper to a scream. Vincent Price, Susan Tyrrell, Cameron Mitchell. Rosalind Cash. Clu Gulager. The eyes of Oldfield are upon them.
How do you stay away from it?
How do you know that I did?
From a whisper to a scream.
Okay, welcome back. I have gone and watched From a Whisper to a Scream, aka The Offspring, and I'm ready to talk about my thoughts and the plot and what happened in this movie. So, Whisper to a Scream, aka The Offspring. This is an anthology horror film directed and co-written by Jeff Burr. One of the interesting things about this movie is that it was co-written and produced by Darren Scott, who would go on to produce things like Menace to Society, Fear of a Black Hat, and Tales from the Hood, which they also co-wrote. According to Wikipedia, Jeff Burr, Darren Scott, and the co-writer C. Courtney Joyner were all former film students, so this is almost like their first sort of big break into the industry after graduating from film school. Jeff Burr came up with the idea of let's make an anthology film set around a haunted southern town, and that each story would have this kind of taboo breaking aspect to their story, and then some kind of, classic anthology twists of fate at the end. All anthology movies have to have a wraparound, so of course the wraparound story here follows Susan Tyrrell's journalist character, who witnesses a public execution of Vincent Price's niece in the opening scene. And so Susan Tyrrell then visits Vincent Price at a library to get more information around what happened. And this is where Vincent Price sort of regales Tyrrell's character in our 4 stories of horror about the past of this town, Oldfield, Tennessee. So let's dive in right now to this movie with a story-by-story recap. I will warn you, so I'm going to talk about the plot of each of these 4 stories in a little bit of detail. I will save kind of the explicit, surprises, but I will get pretty close to saying, and this is what might happen. Like I'm not gonna spoil them explicitly for you, but I will get pretty close to. So if you want to, watch this movie completely fresh, I understand. Pause, go watch it. But don't forget to come back and listen to what I have to say. So, the first story is Stanley, which is about a weird, creepy grocer played by Clu Gulager, who is responsible for taking care of his sick sister Eileen at home, and at work he is absolutely obsessed with his boss Grace, who is a younger woman, and he just completely badgers her into going out on a date with him, and he is disgusting. And so at the end of the date, Stanley turns into even more of a slime ball because Eileen says, no, I don't want to do anything with you, and he won't take no for an answer, so he just straight up strangles her. And then even worse, he goes and breaks into the funeral home where, her funeral is happening, and he decides to be incredibly disgusting on an entirely another level and commit some necrophilia. So later that night, something bursts out of Eileen's grave and heads towards Stanley House for some gruesome revenge. This story sets off things to a really sleazy start, and how absolutely gross Stanley's character is kind of wears on you. It's a little bit much when you first start this movie, and this is the first story that you're witnessing. It's it's kind of saved by how it leans into the ridiculous comeuppance that I hinted upon. It's a little too late kind of situation, but it ends satisfyingly, and there is some effects and puppetry and stuff that's going on here that like makes it worthwhile. But for the first like 2/3 of this, you're just like, wow, Stanley is disgusting and I hate him. I mean, like, that's the point, but it is just a little bit much. So yeah, it's a little satisfying by the end of it, but not the best story to start your movie out on. The next story is called On the Run, and it is set in 1950s and follows a man with debt to the mob. Gangsters are after him, and so he decides he's going to run away, and he falls into a boat and kind of drifts into a swamp, and is saved by an old man who lives in a shack and practices voodoo and is potentially immortal. So our main character, another guy who sucks, which is, a bit of a theme here, can't leave enough alone, and he absolutely badgers the old man into teaching him voodoo. He's like, "You're immortal. I gotta be immortal too. You gotta tell me how to be immortal." So the old man tries to teach him voodoo and teach him the ways of how to be immortal, but the main dude just sucks at it. He just cannot do it, and he sucks. So he decides, I'm just gonna steal this old man's elixir and drink it myself, which really angers the old man, who sets out for his own kind of revenge. And ultimately ends up with a lifetime of pain for our main character. I would say this segment is one of 2 of 4 segments that just aren't the best. One of 2 worst of this movie. Not only does it lean on pretty like outdated voodoo, tired kind of stereotypical stuff. When it comes to that approach, it also is a little boring, and it is like I don't know. I understand these these are about gross men and they suck, and you don't the movie doesn't want you to care about them. It wants you to be satisfied with their comeuppance. But I just kind of found like I don't care about this, and like the ending, that thing that happens to him is like kind of interesting, but this one didn't do too much for me. Our next story, Lovecraft's Traveling Amusements, is probably tied with Stanley for being the movie's highlight. This one takes place in 1933 and follows a woman who falls in love with Stephen, a glass eater at the local sideshow. The carnival owner has forbidden him to mingle with outsiders, and as a punishment, she makes like all the glass he's ever eaten start to worm its way out anytime him and his potential mate try to be intimate. So a big thing about this story is there's just a lot of back and forth between the couple trying to get away from the carnival. You don't really know why he's not allowed to, see her or be involved or, intermingling with outsiders. And the carnival owner also has a bit of a voodoo angle. She has like a doll that she uses to punish him. And this one has some really great effects, and it works itself up to the final set piece pretty nicely. I would say this is probably the goriest of the 4, potentially, but it is the one that has kind of the most satisfying ending, which is interesting because it's actually not one that has, a despicable main character and them getting their sort of like just desserts. It has like a main character and a villain. And so, we don't necessarily want to see what happens to this guy happen. We want to know, why can't he see her? Why can't they go and fall in love? Which kind of makes it break the mold of it a little bit. Usually you like to see the sort of evil people get their comeuppance, but I think just because this one is so effects based, it ends up being the most satisfying. Finally, 4 Soldiers, the final of 4 anthology stories in this film, is likely my least favorite of the whole bunch. Save the worst for last, I guess, is what they wanted to do here. It's about a group of Civil War soldiers who come across a bunch of weird kids who are living alone in a farmhouse and who take all these soldiers hostage. And it turns out that these children specifically are looking for revenge after something that happened to their parents, which I won't spoil here. Cameron Mitchell is in this segment, and ultimately I thought it was kind of boring, and Cameron Mitchell makes out with a kid, and that's really gross, so hard pass. And yeah, I feel like there's things in this movie that are interesting that is trying to get at like, the horrors of the past. I think, at least 2 of these segments have something to do with like slave owners or, like American history, the dark side of American history. And it doesn't really hit on, anything with that I found to be particularly interesting. I just felt like it was a bit of a sort of like dressing of the story. I think it's interesting, and I think the settings are interesting, and I think, the stories aren't terrible, but I just think two of them are pretty lackluster compared to the rest of them. So that brings us to the epilogue, where there will be some kind of twist involving Vincent Price and Susan Tyrrell. I'll leave that to you to discover if you decide to watch this movie. I would say overall, it's fine. Anthologies always have you expecting there's going to be ups and downs, and there's going to be some stories better than others. And this 4-story film is basically a 2 out of 4. In general, the punchlines to these stories come pretty late. You don't get a lot of satisfaction. They aren't lingered on very much, except for maybe the carnival one, which is why maybe it was the most successful. It's just really a lot of waiting for the shoe to drop, and then you don't get, a lot of satisfaction from that happening. It just sort of happens and we move on. That said, the effects that do pop up here are really great. So it's kind of almost worth watching for that alone. I would say if you love anthology movies and this is one that you haven't seen, it's maybe worth looking into. It's getting to be Halloween, season, so this is a passable pick, I would say, for Halloween, but just don't expect it to blow you away. Thank you for watching the watch list. I believe this one is going to be on Patreon a week early and then on YouTube in the public. I think that's how I'm going to be doing these things. So go to back-road.com for more. Lots of podcasts there for you, lots of written articles, reviews, and more. And until next time, I'm your host, Dan Gorman. This has been The Watchlist, and goodbye.